commercially obsolete. This creation also enables the production and manipulation of hundreds of thousands of horsepower, bringing instruments on any point of the globe into action regardless of their distance from the transmitter.
Instruments?
Telegraph keys, phones, clocks, remote photography.
You have a wireless means for transmitting pictures?
Morgan rebounded, raising his eyebrows. There is nothing novel in telephotography. Edison has been working on it since Elisha Gray's device was presented at the 1893 exposition. My patents simply usurp the need for using wires.
Don't push my tolerance, Mr. Tesla. Your proposal, as far as I understand, only deals with telegraphy. I'm a simple man who wants a way to signal incoming steamers during times of fog, to send messages to Europe, maybe get Wall Street prices when I'm in England. Can you do this? Can you send wireless messages such long distances?
Indeed I can, Mr. Morgan.
And the problem of billing. Wouldn't anyone with a receiver have free access to this information? I'm not about to subsidize my competitors, or the public for that matter.
I can guarantee absolute privacy for all messages. Broad rights have been secured, which gives me a monopoly in the States and most of Europe.
How broad are your costs?
Although this work concerns a decade of effort, I know that I'm in the presence of a great philanthropist, and therefore do not hesitate to leave the apportionment of my interest and compensation entirely to your generosity.
Don't flatter me, Mr. Tesla. Let's get down to brass tacks. What will it cost?
My plan requires 2 transmitting towers, one to transmit across the Atlantic and the other across the Pacific. The former would require an expenditure of approximately $100,000, the latter about $250,000.
Let's talk about one ocean at a time. What would I get for funding the construction of a wireless plant to cross the Atlantic?
Its working capacity would equal at least 4 of the present ocean cables, and it would take 6 to 8 months to complete.
What about Marconi? Stetson says his costs are 1/7 of your quote.
That is so. However, there are key elements missing for his success, elements which can only be found in my patents, in apparatus universally identified with my name and published in writings dating back to 1890 and 1893, when Marconi was still pulling his mother's apron strings.
He transmitted 1,400 words from ship to shore, right here in New York during last year's America's Cup races. I know. I was there. I saw his equipment.
Mere child's play. He is using equipment designed by others, and also the wrong frequency. The slightest changes in weather will disrupt his messages, and he has no device for creating separate channels. I have tested his Hertzian frequencies at length, Mr. Morgan, and believe there is no commercial viability in them whatsoever.
Why exactly are they so wrong?
For example, they do not make use of the natural electrical properties of the Earth. The Tesla currents, on the other hand, are tuned to the frequencies of our planet. These are continuous waves, not pulsed interruptions. In short, my way is best for transmitting substantive information and ensuring total privacy.
I have a handful of articles with Marconi's picture all over them which appear to disagree with you. The British Post Office is using the Hertzian method. Here's a newspaper report I picked up in England from an admiral who's used Marconi's transmitters for distances exceeding 80 miles. Our ship movements have been directed with an ease and certainty and carried out with a confidence which, without this wonderful extension of the range of signaling, would have been wholly unattainable. It is a veritable triumph for Signor Marconi, and I have articles which question whether you have ever sent messages beyond the confines of your laboratory.
I see that I've taken up enough of your time, the inventor said, looking at his watch. I thank you very much for your hospitality.
I'm not saying we can't do business, Mr. Tesla, but I'm going to have to think this over.
Very good. Upon Tesla's departure, Morgan took out a deck of cards and went through his nightly ritual of playing solitaire. Before him was another file on Tesla's patents, but these were not in wireless. Mr. Tesla's discoveries do away with the carbon filament. He explained that by creating an electrostatic field, Cold vacuum tubes could be hung anywhere in the room. They cannot burn out because there is no filament to be destroyed. The estimated manufacture of incandescent lamps is 50,000 a day. December 10th, 1900. Dear Mr. Morgan, appreciating the immense value of your time, I have withdrawn more or less hastily last Friday, preferring to make a few condensed statements at long distance, which, with a small effort on your part, will put you in the possession of knowledge I have gained only after a long and exhaustive study. This lengthy letter, one of the first of many, began with a quote from Professor Adolf Schlabe of Germany, who referred to Tesla as the father of this telegraphy, and also included quotes from Lord Kelvin and Sir William Crookes on other developments in the field, such as in the construction of his oscillator for generating wireless frequencies. The letter also pointed out Tesla's legal position, having patented all of the fundamentals of the process in America, Australia, South Africa, and Europe, and noted the specific flaws of Marconi's system, pointed out above. Apologizing for this digression, I beg you to bear in mind that my patents in this still virgin field, should you take hold of them, will command a position which, for a number of reasons, will be legally stronger than that held by those of my own discovery in power transmission by alternating currents. Tesla ended the letter with a rousing challenge. Permit me to remind you that had there been only faint-hearted and close-fisted people in the world, nothing great would ever have been done. Raphael could not have created his marvels. Columbus could not have discovered America. The Atlantic cable could not have been laid. You of all should be the man to embark on this enterprise, which will be an act of inestimable value to mankind. The first billion-dollar trust. Perhaps the most outrageous character living in the Waldorf was the cigar-chomping robber baron and stock market manipulator John W. Beta Million Gates, co-owner of the American Steel and Wire Company. During an average day, Gates could win or lose $40,000 in a poker game, and on some occasions the swing could be 10 times that much. Conferring with Henry Clay Frick, another Waldorf occupant and occasional poker companion, Gates helped choreograph one of the biggest deals of the century. On December the 12th, a dinner for the steel magnates was held in honor of Charles Schwab at the University Club. Sponsored by Schwab's boss, Andrew Carnegie, the attendees included J. Pierpont Morgan, Edward H. Harriman, August Belmont, Jacob Schiff, John W. Gates, and Carnegie's first manager, Henry Clay Frick. In an unrehearsed speech after the meal, with Carnegie now absent from the meeting, Schwab expounded in a clear and forthright manner on the advantages of creating a giant steel trust. After discussions which lasted until 3 in the morning, Morgan began to realize the great benefit of Schwab's plan, and within a few months he finalized the merger, placing Schwab at the head of the new $1.4 billion steel trust, the first company ever to be capitalized at over $1 billion. Carnegie received approximately $226 million, Frick $60 million, and Rockefeller, for his iron mines, $90 million. Gates, the gargantuan gambler, playing it like a poker hand, held out as long as possible until Morgan threatened to erect a wire company without him, and so he too walked away with a hefty profit. By March 1901, with the creation of the new corporation, Morgan was able to add steel to his portfolio, which at this time included electrical, shipping, mining, and power industries, as well as telephone, railroad, and insurance conglomerates. Political cartoons of the day portrayed him as an Atlas with the earth on his back, or as a Goliath towering over less powerful individuals, such as the King of England, the German Kaiser, or the President of the United States. In reaction to Morganization, anarchy started to become a viable political alternative. Furthermore, although Morgan stood for strength and stability in business, in reality the creation of U.S. Steel was a magnificent gamble. Carnegie knew this, and thus stated, "Pierpont is not an iron master. He knows nothing about the business of making and selling steel. I managed my trade with him so that I was paid in bonds, not stocks. He will make a fizzle of the business and default in payments of the interest. I will then foreclose and get my properties back." Schwab also feared this. Within 2 years the crafty conciliator had resigned from the firm to take charge of Bethlehem Steel, a much smaller gem that was sturdy and profitable. Thus Morgan was to have his headaches with the steel monopoly, partly because of market problems and mostly because of labor disputes, particularly a strike which nearly crippled the company. Probably the main reason why U.S. Steel succeeded was because of the invention of the automobile, which created an enormous new market. To offset the possibility of the great conglomerate folding and to raise the potential for more revenues, Morgan enlisted the famous stock manipulator James Keene to create an artificial interest. Keene bought and sold large blocks of U.S. Steel to bogus investors in order to create the illusion of bullish interest. The sham worked, and within a few weeks the New York Stock Exchange experienced the most active trading days in history. Big Steel's common stock, which had been offered on the market at 38, rose almost immediately to 55, and Pierpont Morgan became the hero of the financial world, and the principal demon of those who feared and hated monopoly. The Tesla deal. Tesla met with Morgan in the midst of these steel negotiations in attempts to solidify a deal. At the height of Christmas season, he took a cab to Morgan's office at 23 Wall Street and handed the financier some of his specifications. "Mr. Morgan, my plan and my patents, which I offer to you, will command a position legally stronger than that held by the owners of Bell's telephone or by the holders of the patents based upon my discovery in power transmission by alternating current." "Send me the paperwork, and I'll look it over." "Sir, in view of the intense activity in this field, it is desirable that I should be placed without delay in a position enabling us to profit from my advanced knowledge." Morgan moved over to the window and stared down Wall Street. "If I agree to help build your station to transmit across the Atlantic, I want it understood that I am—" and then he turned to face the Serb and lowered his voice to barely a whisper, "a silent partner. Do you know what that means, Mr. Tesla?" "Yes, sir, I do." "Good. I want to be frank. I do not have a good impression of you. You abound in controversy. You're boastful, and aside from your deal with Westinghouse, you have yet to show a profit on any other creation. On the other hand, I appreciate your talents, so let me put my cards on the table. If we proceed, whatever figure we decide upon shall be firm. I will not be bilked for continuing research funds." "It is not money I seek, although these inventions in your strong hands, with your consummate knowledge of business, can be worth an incalculable amount. You know the value of scientific advancement and artistic creation. Your terms are mine." "That is not good enough. Give me specifics. Give me a figure." "As I stated at our first meeting, I think $100,000 will suffice for the construction of a 90-foot-high transatlantic transmitter." "Let me be certain on this. Shall we say $150,000 for the erection of said transmission tower, and a 50-50 split on the company's stock?" Morgan reached for his checkbook, wrote out a down payment, and handed it to the inventor. Overawed at his good fortune and humbled in the presence of the king, Tesla could not stop himself. Let the control be yours, Mr. Morgan. I insist that you take 51% and I 49%. "You are a strange man indeed. All right, it's a deal. After the papers are drawn up, you may draw on the House of Morgan as the need arises for the full limit." January the 3rd, 1901. My dear Colonel Astor, hearty wishes for the new century. Mr. Morgan's generous backing, for which I shall be grateful all my life, secures me my triumphs in wireless telegraphy and telephony, but I am still unable to put my completed inventions, oscillators, fluorescent lights, on the market. I can hardly believe that you, my friend since years, should hesitate to join me in introducing them when I can offer you 10 times better returns on your investment than anyone else. Yours sincerely, N. Tesla. The fine print. March 5th, 1901. Dear Mr. Tesla,
I beg to acknowledge receipt of your letter of the 1st instant, together with assignments of an interest in various patents as shown upon the schedule, and assignments handed me therewith, and to confirm the understanding therein expressed. Very truly yours, J. Pierpont Morgan. The octopus was not content with creating a simple partnership in wireless. Unbeknownst to the inventor, Morgan wanted the lighting concern as well, and control of Tesla's patents. Boldly, these were added to the agreement. Tesla was now placed in a difficult situation, since Astor was the principal backer in the other enterprise, and the inventor had not planned to include the actual patents as part of his collateral. "When I received your formal letter," Tesla wrote 3 years later, "it specified an interest in 51% in patents on these inventions. That was different, though my share was the same. It was a simple sale. The terms were entirely immaterial to me, and I said nothing for fear of offending you. You have repeatedly referred to some stock, and it is just possible that a mistake was made." Rather than confronting his new benefactor head-on, Tesla acquiesced. February the 18th, 1901. Dear Mr. Stedlich, Morgan's intermediary, I need scarcely say that I would sign any document approved by Mr. Morgan, but believe that there exists a misunderstanding in regards to my system of lighting which was not included in the original proposition. Rather than try to amend the agreement to remove this vital concern, which, in Tesla's words in the same letter, will create an industrial revolution, the inventor pointed out the great advantages of the lighting venture and included a promotional announcement entitled Tesla's Artificial Daylight. He concluded by stating that, besides myself, Colonel Astor is interested. Thus it will be necessary for me to comply with a formality before making the assignments. I shall attend to this matter at the earliest possible moment. A month before, perhaps in anticipation of this problem, Tesla had appealed once again to his original benefactor. January the 11th, 1901. My dear Colonel Astor, since Mr. Adams and his associates are entirely out, I have practically nobody but you and Mr. Morgan with me. Please let me hear from you. With me you are not with some wild syndicate, but with a man to whom your name, credit, and interest are sacred. Astor called on the telephone a week later. He told the inventor that he was concerned that Tesla did not have fundamental patents and that other inventors might have priority, particularly on the wireless enterprise. Do not be misled by what the papers say, Colonel. I have the controlling rights. Why not come in with Mr. Morgan and myself? Astor avoided making any definitive statements, and so Tesla apparently simply attached the lighting concern to the wireless deal with the Commodore. Now Morgan controlled the fundamentals behind two completely independent new industries. Tesla could hardly complain. He had agreed to the proposal. All he had to do was succeed with the capital now provided. March 5th, 1901. Dear Mr. Steele, another Morgan intermediary, now that all dangers of conveying a wrong impression to Mr. Morgan is removed by his kind acceptance of my proposal, I would call to his attention that I consider my fundamental patents on methods and apparatus for the wireless transmission of energy as the most valuable patents of modern times, and as to my system of lighting, I am convinced that it constitutes one of the most important advances and is of enormous commercial value. Yours sincerely, N. Tesla. On the 13th of the month, always a favored day for the superstitious wizard, Tesla paid Westinghouse back a note for $3,045. He was out of debt and on his way. 30. World Telegraphy Center, 1901. Dear Mr. Morgan, how can I begin to thank you in the name of my profession and my own? Great, generous man. My work will proclaim loudly your name to the world. You will soon see that not only am I capable of appreciating deeply the nobility of your action, but also of making your primarily philanthropic investment worth 100 times the sum you have put at my disposal in such a magnanimous and princely way. With many, many wishes from all my heart for your happiness and welfare, believe me,
Ever yours most faithfully, N. Tesla. In March 1900, there was a fire in the East Houston Street building that housed Tesla's laboratory. The Jews on the lower floor were burned out, and this frightened me nearly to death, Tesla wrote the Johnsons. It was a close shave, and if the misfortune had happened, it would have been probably the last of your friend Nikola. Throughout this period, the onslaught by the press also continued in an unbridled fashion. February 25th, 1901. My dear Mr. Tesla, we never forget old friends and defend them against all malicious assailants at all hazards. Yours truly, Ernest Heinrich. One of the old guard from the Westinghouse Corporation, Heinrich included a newspaper clipping which he had written. Anyone who is ignorant, Heinrich wrote, does not know that Tesla stands in the front rank of electrical inventors by what he has actually accomplished. Another who came to Tesla's defense was T.C. Martin, who authored a word of praise in Science. The ship was off its course, Tesla wrote, but I always had faith in the captain. December the 13th, 1900. My dear Tesla, I am delighted to get your kind favor of December 12th. I know of no change whatever in my sentiments towards you these many years from the beginning until now. I shall always be very proud of my modest association with your earlier work. As ever, T.C. Martin. Unfortunately, there was also bickering between Tesla and Martin about the previous editorial attacking Tesla in Martin's journal and about Tesla's slow progress on his other inventions. Concerning the vacuum lamps, Martin wrote, I should be delighted to see you or any other man give us the commercial art. Perturbed, Tesla cut off his correspondence, and so the friendship remained impaired. Just 3 months later, in March 1901, Tesla invited an admirer and disciple of Swami Vivekananda, Miss Emma C. Thursby, to his laboratory. My light will then be permanently installed, and you and your friends, Miss Farmer in particular, will be most welcome to see it. Tesla's new surprise. Julian Hawthorne. Great preparations for an experiment upon a stupendous scale are being made at the Wizard's Laboratory on East Houston Street. An unannounced visitor gained entrance today by chance. Tesla was not there, but what the visitor saw chained him to the spot. A wonderful color. From a stout beam from the ceiling hung 3 dazzling, pulsating clots of purple-violet light. The room glowed with the warmth of a strange, unearthly rich color, a hue that is not listed in the spectrum. Above and below the beams twisted long glass spirals closely coiled, snakes of beating violet flame. Sudden darkness. One of Tesla's workmen found the unannounced visitor spellbound. A quick spring to the wall, a concealed button touched, and darkness. Those who know say that this violet light is the wizard Tesla's new flash signal to the Martians. He will reveal it to the world soon. It is even hinted around the corner of Mulberry Street at police headquarters that Tesla has already wigwagged the red planet and had a response. Hawthorne was living in Yonkers and often took a train down to Manhattan, dining with Tesla at the beginning of the year. They shared a number of common friends, including Stanford White, whose father, Richard Grant White, had confessed to Hawthorne once, among other sacred confidences, of a woman whom he had found and loved in New York. The rumor, in essence, was that he had been essentially a bigamist, maintaining one home for his family and one for his concubine. Perhaps this explained Stanley's penchant for philandering. The son, however, easily surpassed the father, as he was able to maintain 5 or 6 retreats, including an estate on Long Island, an apartment in Gramercy Park, the Garden Tower Suite, the morgue on West 55th Street, which he and his compatriots like Saint-Gaudens used in a pinch, and his most infamous haunt at 22 West 24th Street. In March, Stanford became smitten by the exotic charms of the 16-year-old Florodora siren Evelyn Nesbit, who had been featured as a Gibson centerfold for Collier's and as a nearly bare-breasted Spanish dancer in a popular musical on Broadway. White watched her perform night after night for many weeks before he was able to arrange a rendezvous, which first took place in the heat of summer at the 24th Street studio. "Stamford had me put in an electric door," the inventor told Hawthorne. "You press a button and it automatically opens." White had decorated his bachelor den in shades of red, with velvet curtains on the windows, soft cushions on the floor, and tapestries, statues, and paintings, mostly nudes, all around. In his loft, with the room set like a small forest, lit with a bright skylight, could be found a red velvet swing hanging from the ceiling, like one of Chaucer's toys, with green ropes trailing down from the seat, like vines from a tree. Besides meeting with the mystical son of the renowned Gothic author Nathaniel Hawthorne, Tesla dined with Stanford White and sometimes Mark Twain at the Players' Club, or with Spanish-American war hero Richmond Hobson, Rudyard Kipling, or, of course, the Johnsons, throughout this period. Catherine was caught up in her interest in spiritualism and tried an experiment in thought transference without the inventor knowing. In jest, Tesla wrote back, "My dear Mrs. Johnson, there was no telepathic influence this time. I never thought of you even for a moment. Sincerely, Millionaire Kid." Rooted in his materialistic philosophy, the superstitious wizard who talks with other worlds continued to repudiate the notion that human minds could interact by extrasensory means, even though he had recently saved some friends from a train wreck because of a premonition. Overtly, however, he would maintain that psychic phenomena was poppycock. Catherine would not only be teased for her mystical bent, but also over possession of Hobson, and over her looks. "My dear Luca, when Mrs. Philippoff is out of town, I think of Mrs. Decay as the most charming lady of my experience. It would be advisable, Luca, to keep both ladies in ignorance of this. A word to the wise is sufficient." Considered much like an uncle to the family, Tesla also expressed his continuing affection for the Johnson children. For Agnes, he would sign a New Year's card, "Nikola Hobson," and for Owen, he took the time to read the youngster's first novel, The Arrow of the Almighty. He also congratulated Owen on his impending marriage. Agnes would also later marry, and she would inherit the vast Johnson correspondence, much of which was donated to Columbia University. According to the present Mrs. Robert Underwood Johnson, the wife of Owen's son, named after the grandfather, Agnes was awful. I didn't like her at all. Her daughter, however, was very beautiful. Paderewski felt that Anne had great talent. Owen was dashing and attractive, and had a lot of his mother's qualities. As a writer, he authored the Lawrenceville series and made a good living as a novelist. The present Mrs. Johnson stated that Catherine had an Irish personality. She could be gay and lively and fun-loving, but also depressive underneath. The present Robert Underwood Johnson lived with his grandparents. They had 2 Irish servants, Josie and Nora. Catherine would go into one of her moods and just stay in her room, and wouldn't come down even for meals. Her depression became more severe after World War I. She said that Robert was considered to be boring, very formal, with old-world manners, a fine old gentleman. Catherine was attracted to Tesla because he was imaginative and exciting from a European point of view. He might have brought more gaiety into the house. Wardenclyffe. Inventor Nikola Tesla has purchased a 200-acre tract at Wardenclyffe-on-the-Sound, 9 miles east of Port Jefferson, for the establishment of a wireless telegraphy plant. The land and improvements will cost $150,000. On March 1, 1901, Tesla officially signed his contract with Morgan. He was now able to begin construction of his laboratory and tower on Long Island, 65 miles from New York City. 2 days later, Morgan officially announced the creation of U.S. Steel. No such announcement was made about the Tesla Company. The above article, which appeared in a local paper, the Long Island Democrat, was perhaps the only one to make reference to the correct figure of $150,000 which Morgan provided. When John O'Neill wrote his biography in 1944, he did not know the details of the Morgan-Tesla relationship, even though he had personally known Tesla for over 30 years. The inventor, whose papers were still under lock and key at the time of the completion of the biography, had told O'Neill that the financier provided the funds in his capacity as a philanthropist, although this was not the case at all. It was a simple business partnership. Tesla celebrated the new connection by giving a large party at the Waldorf Astoria. He had discussed with Oscar the details of the menu and participated in tasting the various sauces. Impeccably dressed, he reserved one of the smaller banquet halls, requesting his guests to arrive at 7:30 sharp. White was probably there, along with the Johnsons, Hobson, and perhaps Miss Merrington, or Vivekananda acolytes Miss Thursby or Miss Farmer, or Anne Morgan. As legend tells it, when it came time for dinner to be served, the maitre d' was forced to call Tesla aside to inform him that he owed the hotel back bills totaling more than $900. He was under orders. Dinner could not be served unless the matter was straightened out first. With an ace up his sleeve, Tesla nonchalantly welcomed his guests and then eased out to see the manager. Mr. Bolt was cordial but insistent, so Tesla made a call and put him on the phone with Morgan. Flustered, Bolt was nevertheless able to hold his ground. A check was sent immediately, and the inventor was saved from embarrassment. Soon after, Tesla met with real estate mogul Charles R. Flint, who arranged a meeting with James Warden, director of the North Shore Industrial Company. Warden, who was in control of an 1,800-acre potato farm on Long Island Sound in Suffolk County, provided Tesla with 200 acres adjacent to what is today called Route 25A. The inventor was also given the option to purchase the remaining parcel. Perhaps to sweeten the deal, or in lieu of certain other arrangements, the site was named Wardenclyffe after the owner, and a post office under that appellation was established on April the 2nd. 5 years later, in 1906, the name was officially changed to the village of Shoreham. Electrical World, an engineer, reported, "The company is offering its stock for sale at $100 per share, expecting to pay 15% dividends. The Wardenclyffe Building Company shall have the first right and privilege to do all building and make all constructional improvements, and shall have the first right of purchase of any additional land offered by it for sale." Warden, who was interviewed for the article, predicted that large profits will be realized in the future. Describing Tesla as the foremost electrician of the age, whose achievements in electrical science eclipse in practical importance all other discoveries of the century, Warden noted that the inventor has just closed a contract to expend a very large sum of money in constructing electrical laboratories and the main station for his wireless telegraphy system of communication with Europe and Australasia. This development will require a large number of houses for the accommodation of the several hundreds of people whom Mr. Tesla will employ. Tesla's ultimate plan was to construct a world telegraphy center with a laboratory, wireless transmitter, and production facilities for manufacturing his oscillators and vacuum tubes. He had negotiated with Morgan the first step, that is, to build the laboratory and a simple tower for reporting yacht races, signaling ocean steamers, and sending Morse-coded messages to England. Simultaneously, he discussed with McKim, Mead, and White the construction of an entire metropolis, a model city, using the 1,800 acres available, with homes, stores, and buildings to house upwards of 2,500 workers. Wardenclyffe will be the largest operation of its kind in the world, Tesla told the local newspapers. The laboratory will draw men from the highest scientific circles, and their presence will benefit all of Long Island. With a staff of 75 draftsmen, the eminent architectural firm of McKim, Mead, and White is well suited to the task, Tesla concluded. They billed him for $1,168 for blueprints. White, it appeared, was placed in a precarious position. Morgan still had reservations about his connection with the flamboyant engineer. In his capacity as interior decorator, White in February had located a statue in London which he knew the financier was interested in. "My dear Commodore," the engaging redhead wrote, "it is really like parting with a piece of my heart to give it up. Thus, I would honestly rather present it to you than sell it, as my only desire is to please you." But Morgan insisted on compensating him for the statue, paying White double the normal commission, in order to show that he too felt their affiliation transcended business. April the 26th, 1901. Dear Nikola, I send you with this a new revised plan for your powerhouse, also a very close estimate, which we have made ourselves in this office. The work could be done for about $14,000. I am very sure for a building of this size that it will be impossible to get these figures down lower. Affectionately, Stanford White. Bids were taken from Sturgis and Hill, and also Mertz and Company, two contractors White often worked with. In May, blueprints for the laboratory were sent over to Tesla for his approval. In June, a contract with Sturgis and Hill was finalized, and in July, the land was cleared and a road was put in. White recommended one of his associates, W.D. Crowe, as architect in charge. Crowe would also do the actual construction of the tower. The sun was out bright one morning in the early spring as the inventor strutted down Peacock Alley and up Fifth Avenue towards 42nd Street and Grand Central Station, to transfer to Pennsylvania Station and take an early train to Wardenclyffe. Golden shafts of light billowed through the upper windows of the cathedral-like edifice as Tesla crossed the mighty corridor and stepped aboard the luxury car. Ordering a pot of coffee, he began to peruse his mail. The train rattled out of the city, past Manhasset, Oyster Bay, where Vice President Roosevelt lived, St. James near Smithtown, where White had his family estate, Port Jefferson, and finally to Wardenclyffe. With stops at the various towns, the trip took about an hour and a half, the Connecticut shoreline sometimes visible across the Sound. It was when he reached page 280 of the Electrical Review that his jaw dropped and his cup of coffee spilled all over the prim white tablecloth. Syntonic Wireless Telegraphy. Guglielmo Marconi. A large amount of inaccurate and misleading information is being published, even in the scientific press, on telegraphy through space. I shall endeavor to correct some of these misstatements. It is my intention to describe fully the efforts I have made in order to tune or to syntonize the wireless system efforts, which, I am glad to say, have been crowned with complete success. I first constructed an arrangement which consists of a Leyden jar or condenser circuit in which included the primary of what may be called a Tesla coil, and a secondary which is connected to the earth or aerial conductor. The idea of using a Tesla coil to produce oscillations is not new. It was tried by the post office, i.e. with priests, when experimenting with my system in 1898, and also suggested in a patent specification by Dr. Lodge, dated May 10, 1897, number 11, and by Professor Brown in 1899. Tesla described to Morgan in a letter written 3 years later how this information affected him. When I discovered, rather accidentally, that others who openly cast ridicule on what I had undertaken and discredited my apparatus were secretly employing it, evidently bent on the same task, I found myself confronted with wholly unforeseen conditions. Your, Morgan's, participation called for a careful revision of my plans. I could not develop the business slowly in grocery shop fashion. I could not report yacht races or signal incoming steamers. There was no money in this. This was no business for a man of your position and importance. Perhaps you have never fully appreciated the sense of this obligation. This passage displays misunderstanding by Tesla of Morgan's personality. Unlike the inventor, whose ideas existed in abstract and futuristic forms, the pragmatic financier's mind was on the present. Morgan loved sailing and yacht races, and would resent another suggesting what a man in his position should or should not do. Tesla reveals in this letter that he had to change his plans due to the advantage shrewd competitors had, e.g., due to Marconi's pirating and connections with Pupin, Edison, European investors, and sovereign rulers. He thereupon decided to abandon the agreed-upon scheme of building a modest-sized transmitter and replaced it with the idea of constructing a skyscraping tower 600 feet high, designs for which he scratched out on his fancy Waldorf Astoria stationery. Ironically, for the oft-times altruistic Tesla, it was his greed, vanity, and megalomania which drove him into the new venture. To have his ideas stolen from him was abhorrent. In his autobiography, Tesla would later refer to Marconi, although not by name, as a parasite and microbe of a nasty disease. It was at this moment that the inventor decided to scrap the trivial idea of sending mere Morse codes across the Atlantic. He would inaugurate a world communications enterprise to pulverize the vermin as a pachyderm would crush a toad. Having reached the pinnacle of the ruling class, Tesla's self-image swelled with the occasion, for he had conceived a telecommunications enterprise more efficient than the combined forces of today's radio, television, wire service, lighting, telephone, and power systems. His ultimate plan even included the production of rain in the deserts, the lighting of skies above shipping lanes, the wireless production of energy for automobiles and airships, a universal timekeeping apparatus, and a mechanism for achieving interplanetary communication. Having attained cosmic consciousness, he offered this creation to the king of the financial world, and the king had accepted. To the inventor, it was simply a detail that this vision was not in agreement with the specifics of the contract, or that Tesla never really told Morgan his greater scheme. This work, like White's statue, transcended the traditional rules of business. Panic on Wall Street. It was just 60 days since Tesla had signed his contract with Morgan, 30 days after Morgan sailed for Europe. Yet already Tesla had irreversibly changed his plans. Since he had been a gambler and pool player in his salad days and was now living among the most audacious of high rollers at the Waldorf, these old tendencies resurfaced now that he had hooked the biggest fish on Wall Street. He had calculated the odds based on certain assumptions about the stability of the economy and the quickness of his access to Morgan's $150,000, and he proceeded boldly with the completion of the masterwork. How could the inventor know that on May the 10th the stock market would crash and that the main culprit in the catastrophe would be his backer, J. Pierpont Morgan? The collapse of the stock market occurred because of a bitter rivalry that existed between Morgan and Ned Harriman. Morgan, who was in charge of the Northern Pacific Railroad, having tossed Henry Villard out a decade earlier, had bought control of an enormous line called the Chicago-Burlington. This concern stretched its tracks from Atlantic ports to Chicago and down the Mississippi all the way to New Orleans. Harriman, who controlled the Union Pacific, or southern route to the west, wanted access to the Burlington as well, and he tried to negotiate with Morgan for a seat on the board of directors. Unfortunately, due to bitter disagreements stemming from an old railroad deal in which the crafty Harriman had outwitted the Commodore, Morgan came to detest the man. Therefore, he would not share the Burlington, and became irrational whenever Harriman's name was mentioned. Thus, while Morgan enjoyed his art purchases in England and his mistress in France, Harriman, with the help of his broker, Jacob Schiff, clandestinely began purchasing Morgan's Northern Pacific. Instead of trying to outbid Morgan for the Burlington, Harriman boldly bought Morgan's own holding company out from underneath him. To accomplish this coup, it would take the adventuresome Harriman close to $100 million, which he raised by selling enormous blocks of Union Pacific bonds, and Harriman actually successfully carried out the operation. By the first week in May, Harriman owned more than 50% of Morgan's precious company, which had been affectionately called the Nipper. When Morgan received the fateful telegram from his underlings while in France, he tossed his paramour off his lap and wired back the order to buy Northern Pacific back at any price, for Harriman did not yet own a majority of the voting common shares. On May the 9th, the stock rocketed from $150 to $1,000 per share. A panic ensued as people who bought in on the Nipper were unable to obtain possession of their shares, as neither Morgan nor Harriman would release any. Most of the other stocks dropped when investors sold in order to cover their losses. The end product was the tumbling of the market and the creation of extreme economic and political times, and also monetary chaos. Stanford White was one of many who lost heavily in the market. For Tesla, costs increased dramatically, and credit was nearly impossible to obtain. The front page of the New York Times reported the calamity. The greatest general panic that Wall Street has ever known came upon the stock market yesterday, with the result that before it was checked, many fortunes had been swept away. Even Morgan's precious U.S. steel dropped from its current price of $46 to a low of $8 a share. Numerous investors were financially ruined, and some purportedly committed suicide. One rumor concerning this famous event was that Morgan won back the company because Harriman's broker, Jacob Schiff, was in the synagogue on the fateful Saturday when Morgan began buying more shares of Northern Pacific. Schiff, however, never intended to wrest the company from Morgan. His goal was simply to obtain a large enough percentage of the company to force Morgan to give Harriman a piece of the Chicago Burlington. Harriman, in his frenzy, wanted to change their plan so as to gain control over all three railroads, but Schiff overruled him. Thus, the skyrocketing of the stock and ensuing crash of the market were based solely on Morgan's buy orders. The economic upheaval created heavy financial burdens on Tesla. However, he would not completely realize the increasing financial difficulties immediately, for the effects on construction costs, wages, and incidentals would ripple throughout the summer and fall. Before Pierpont's departure for England in April, he had assured Tesla that now he had no doubts about the inventor's abilities, and even if by some fluke of misfortune Morgan should not supply the additional funds, Tesla still had his own money and the personality to attract additional investors. At 45 years of age, wealthy, established as a leader of his field, however controversial, and rubbing elbows with the crème de la crème, the tall inventor was well equipped for the task he foresaw. 31. Clash of the Titans, 1901. Make a Tesla or buy a Tesla coil. I made one. Find it. Get books on wireless telegraphy. From the private notebook of Thomas Edison. Throughout the late spring and summer, Tesla commuted regularly to Wardenclyffe, often with a servant of Serbian extraction and a box lunch from the Waldorf Astoria. At night, he returned to the city where he could stop in at the Players' Club, attend a concert, or dine at Delmonico's or Sherry's. In June, having to forego yet another Johnson blowout, he apologized to Robert and Owen for being unable to meet the lady who inspired the celebrated author of The Arrows of the Almighty. White was on his yearly fishing vacation in Canada, so Tesla was on his own for the month. Some of the time was spent scouting out possible apartments to rent in Shoreham, and George Sheff also had to look for a place. In July, the architect returned, and talks resumed concerning the construction of the tower. Having recently joined the Automobile Club of America, which had its headquarters in Locust Valley and counted Vice President Teddy Roosevelt among its members, White would motor out from the city to the club or to St. James in his new steam-powered locomobile, which required a driver, or on his own in a fashionable electric two-seater runabout. With his estate just a few miles from Shoreham, the avid motorist could drive out past the endless flats of potato fields along the same road that also led to the site of Wardenclyffe, to oversee the work and perhaps take the inventor for a spin. The architect's son recalled, "I remember Tesla well, as he often came down to stay with us on Long Island. He used to wander around at night in the garden in the moonlight. And when my mother asked him why he wasn't asleep, he replied, 'I never sleep.' I also remember going to his laboratory in the city as a boy and watching him put several million volts through his body, lighting up two Crookes tubes which he held in his hand." White made Tesla realize that a 600-foot-high transmitter, roughly two-thirds the height of the Eiffel Tower, was simply out of the question. So Tesla dabbled with harmonic ratios of 1/2 and 1/4 that size. With prices so unstable, it would be difficult to calculate the new costs. The Johnsons were as excited as Tesla about the purchase of Wardenclyffe. By July, with the land cleared, it became an opportune moment to visit the site, just a few miles from a lovely beach on the Sound at Wading River, and also not far from Southampton on the Atlantic side. A weekend was set aside to coax Tesla into spending some time swimming. It was a delightful moment, a time to enjoy the salt water and picnic grounds and pose for whimsical photographs of their heads placed in the notches of standard billboard pictures of bodies in striped bathing suits or gaily adorned sitting in the seats of an imitation automobile. In August, with the frame up on the lab and plans for the facing underway, Tesla once again refused a respite in Maine with the Johnsons, writing a teasing letter that, as a member of the 400, he could not meet with people whose fathers had been fruit peddlers and grocers. Perhaps Catherine's father had been such. With the tower now planned as a much larger venture, and Morgan delaying payment of promised funds, Tesla pondered a way not only to obtain owed funds, but also to get Morgan to increase his investment. The monarch with the bulbous snout returned from Europe on the 4th of July. Leaving the ocean liner from the stern in order to avoid the throng of reporters, Morgan ignored his home and moved to the Corsair, his 300-foot-long yacht, living there for the month and staying in Bar Harbor, Maine, through part of August. The art connoisseur was pleased with his recent acquisition of paintings, gemstones, and rare manuscripts. He did not shorten his yearly European excursion on account of a Wall Street crisis, but he was irritable, irrationally perturbed with Harriman, and fearful that the press and public might threaten his empire, if not his life. Morgan was an opinionated man, fair-minded much of the time, but dangerously stubborn at other times. Having detested Harriman for outwitting him not once but twice, he must have been furious when the world viewed him as the villain who had destabilized the economy because of a personal vendetta. A turbulent labor strike by the steel workers added to his unhappiness and the uncertainty of the times. Headlines such as the following caused him to seek armed protection. The rich denounced by socialist labor. Thousands at Cooper Union cheer wordy assaults on capital. J.P. Morgan accused of trying to trustify the earth. This is the century, said Chairman Lucien Sanyal, in which there is going to be social revolution. Whoop went the audience, waving hats and yelling madly for a minute or so. Charles Knoll followed and said he favored the adoption of such resolutions as would chill and make to shiver the spinal column of the capitalists. To end the Northern Pacific fiasco, Morgan and Harriman allowed investors to settle their accounts at $150 a share. The public was not supposed to notice that this price would yield hefty profits to the giants who had purchased their stock for 1/3 less than that price only days earlier. Instead, they were perceived as noble in their attempts to restore order and sanity to the economy. At first, the government wanted Morgan to return stocks to the original investors at original prices. In response, Morgan was quoted as saying that it would be quite a feat to unscramble the eggs and return them to their original hens. When accused of avoiding his responsibility to society, Morgan responded in anger, "I owe the public nothing." For this remark, Morgan would be interrogated by the governmental investigative committees until his dying days, but he weathered the storm easily. Before Morgan left for Maine, he met with the inventor. In a new satchel purchased for the occasion, Tesla brought his latest patent applications, drawings of the half-completed laboratory, and schematics for the tower. The secretary at 23 Wall Street ushered him in. "Mr. Morgan, you have raised great waves in the industrial world, and some have struck my little boat. Prices have gone up in consequence, twice, perhaps 3 times higher than they were, and then there were expensive delays, mostly as a result of activities you excited." "We've all suffered, Mr. Tesla," Morgan said, already perturbed and testy because of the more important imbroglios he was enmeshed in. Tesla pushed on, informing Morgan that he had decided to design a larger tower than agreed upon because of Marconi's piracy. Morgan looked on, at first in detached amazement, as Tesla continued, "Suppose a plant is constructed capable of sending signals within a given radius, and consider an extension to twice the distance. The area being then 4 times as large, the returns will become more valuable. Approximately computed, the average price will be tripled. This means that a plant with a radius activity twice as large will earn 12 times as much, but it will cost twice as much. The greater the distance, the greater the gain, until when the plant can transmit signals to the uttermost confines of the earth, its earning power becomes, so to speak, unlimited. The way to go, Mr. Morgan, is to construct such a plant. It will give the greatest force to my patents and ensure a monopoly, and offers possibilities for business on a large, dignified scale commensurate with your position in life and mine as a pioneer in this art, who has originated all essential principles." "Let me understand you, Mr. Tesla. You have not exploited the lighting enterprise?" "Not yet, sir." "You have not constructed a transmitting tower, but you have just about completed the construction of a laboratory?" "Yes." "You have purchased, is this 200 acres, with an option on 1,600 more, and you have run out of funds?" Only temporarily, sir. Once you supply the balance—
And if I relinquish these funds, will that be enough for the creation of your model city?
No, as I explained,
if we double the size of the tower, I will earn 12 times as much. Is that it?
Precisely.
Get out, Mr. Tesla.
But, sir—
Raising his voice to a dull roar, Morgan reiterated his command.
Quietly, Tesla packed his satchel and slipped away. The inventor was in shock. One can only imagine which favoured swear words Morgan, known on Wall Street for his gruffness and blunt expletives, unfurled upon the prima donna who had pranced into his office with his fantastic scheme and high and mighty demands. Tesla required a few days to regain his composure. Morgan still legitimately owed him a significant amount of funds. The banker was upset, with the problems with the Northern Pacific and with the ensuing denigration by the press. It will pass, Tesla reasoned. The best thing to do would be to re-establish credibility. He forwarded Morgan his most recent patent assignments and then backed off. The following week, White telephoned to suggest that they go with a rough stone facing on the laboratory instead of brick, and the inventor agreed. Please make sure they also put in a fireproof roof, Tesla told his architect. Let's not rush the tower, White cautioned. I'm still calculating figures for you. As White was courting during these very weeks on a daily basis Evelyn Nesbit, and also helping Tesla recalibrate the construction of the complex, it is possible that the tight-lipped inventor became privy to the architect's intimate liaison. In a financial predicament, Tesla reported to White that he had visited the American bridge people to ascertain whether they will be able to construct the cupola of my tower without much delay. As this item will consume the longest time, it is necessary to take all the preliminary steps so that the work may be begun just as soon as you have passed upon the plans. I believe that the American Bridge Company is the best concern to deal with in this matter, Tesla continued, but I beg you not to pay any attention to my suggestion if you think otherwise. The Bethlehem Steel Company will furnish the sheets, but I cannot give the order until we have agreed upon all details.
You must enjoy parting with your money if you're negotiating with American Bridge, White responded. I implore you to let me handle the contracts. I should have the figures in a few weeks, but I can tell you right now, a 300-foot tower is out of the question, so we do not know what size the cupola will be. You must also consider the extra cost for designing the tower so that each individual strut can be replaced if need be without toppling the entire edifice. Please understand, Stanford, I went to the American Bridge Company simply because of my anxiety to have the work pushed through as fast as practicable. I'm only too glad to follow your advice and beg you to consider yourself absolutely free in your choice and arrangements regarding this work. On Friday, September the 6th, 1901, President William McKinley journeyed to Buffalo to attend an exposition and see firsthand the remarkable project instituted at Niagara. Dwarfed by the colossal Tesla turbines, the President wove his way back to the train station, shaking hands with many of the onlookers. While waiting on the platform, a crazed anarchist lurched forward and fired at point-blank range. As McKinley struggled throughout the week at the edge of death, Tesla decided to write to the President's old-time friend Morgan, sending the appeal on the inventor's favorite day, Friday the 13th, the day the President died. "McKinley's passing," Morgan cried, "is the saddest news I have ever heard."
Beginning the letter with, "I respectfully apologize for disturbing you at a time when your mind must be filled with thoughts of a more serious nature than usual," the inventor imprudently reiterated his recent proposal, suggesting that if Morgan doubled his investment, Tesla would be able to send messages across the Pacific as well as the Atlantic, or better yet, if Morgan tripled the amount, the wizard could send messages to any point on the globe, no matter what the distance. On the same day, he also wrote to White, who had finally given him precise figures on his proposed monster-sized tower. "My dear Stanford, I have not been half as dumbfounded by the news of the shooting of the President as I have by the estimates submitted to you, which, together with your kind letter of yesterday, I received last night. One thing is clear. We cannot build that tower as outlined. I cannot tell you how sorry I am, for my calculations show that with such a structure I could reach across the Pacific. Tesla told White that because of the limitations on capital, he would have to fall back on an older design involving the use of 2 and possibly 3 towers, but much smaller. The design would be the same, only the dimensions would be reduced. I shall make some calculations, the inventor concluded, to see how far I can reduce the height without impairing materially the efficiency of the apparatus, and will communicate with you as soon as practicable. The following day, Tesla wrote White again, agreeing to construct a tower with a height of approximately 150 feet. Having worked with figures on a tower 600 feet high in May, Tesla probably reduced it by half by the time he saw Morgan in August, and then in half again after White told him that the costs of a 300-foot tower were prohibitive. Adding the figure of 1/6 larger, which he mentioned to White in his last letter, or 25 feet, we come to 150 plus 25, or 175 feet, which was just about the height of the actual tower. After construction, it was 187 feet. However, Tesla also constructed a well beneath the tower with an accompanying spiral staircase which ran 10 stories below the ground to a depth of 120 feet. Adding this figure to the total, i.e. 187 plus 120, we come to a length of approximately 300 feet, or 1/2 the size of the original plan, and therefore in a harmonic relationship to it. Even this tower, however, was too expensive to build, given the cost of the machinery, complex design of the housing, which required that it be fireproof, and the inflation produced by the crash. In pondering these letters, it becomes apparent that Tesla was not too perturbed by the assassination of the president. Self-engulfed, he was utterly amblyopic when it came to negotiating with Morgan, a man enmeshed in 2 potentially epic crises and 1 history-altering tragedy. Theodore Roosevelt, who now became president, was not a man who was going to be particularly kind to big business. To say that Tesla blundered here will be an understatement. His decision to alter his contract without telling Morgan, and his resolution to proceed with the grand vision when he knew that his funds would be inadequate, were addle-brained. One suspects that once Tesla had signed a contract with the greatest financial force on the planet, a deep-seated subconscious complex was triggered, involving an impatient, egomaniacal streak that forced the inventor to place everything on the line when he should have proceeded in a more discerning way. Incapable of compromising and at risk of self-obliteration, Tesla began construction of the tower after his falling out with Morgan. On the positive side, the inventor knew that he was in a race against pirates and for what he perceived as the Holy Grail, his peerless notch in history. Undaunted, the courageous inventor moved ahead with the conviction that his path was right and that he could not fail. Tesla's seemingly foolhardy decision must be understood in the light of the fact that fortunes had already been reaped on his former inventions by Morgan and others. By 1901, for instance, Morgan's General Electric Company was actually producing more induction motors than the Westinghouse Corporation. Morgan was involved, along with Westinghouse, in instituting an electric subway system in the bowels of Manhattan based on Tesla's polyphase system. And then, of course, there was Niagara Falls. Every home in the world was going to be illuminated by Tesla's system. The revenues pouring into the electric power companies for this new technology were staggering, but Tesla received not a cent. One way or another, he felt that Morgan should give him carte blanche. It was a bleak autumn for the inventor when the ground was broken for the 18-story edifice, Tesla now naming it his magnifying transmitter. Although mostly constructed of wood, 50 tons of iron and steel were also used, along with 50,000 bolts. Taking into account the amount of lumber it took to line the well and build the staircase down, and the difficulty of digging it, one begins to visualize the enormous expenditures that were going to be involved. W.D. Crowe stayed in charge of construction. Hoping for the best, Tesla wrote to Catherine on October the 13th, "My dear Mrs. Johnson, 13 is my lucky number, and so I know you will comply with my wish to come to the Waldorf. And if you do, when I transmit my wireless messages across seas and continents, You will get the finest bonnet ever made if it breaks me. I have already ordered a simple lunch, and you must come en masse. We must exhibit Hobson. I know he likes me better than you. Nikola Tesla, electrical engineer and inventor. In November, the inventor tried once again to approach Morgan, setting up a meeting at 23 Wall Street and bringing a succinct list of his latest patent assignments and his report on how the construction was going. Dear Mr. Morgan, pardon me for trespassing on your valuable time. The practical significance of my system resides in the fact that the effects transmitted diminishes only in a simple ratio with the distance, whereas in all other systems it is reduced in proportion to the square. To illustrate, if the distance be increased 100-fold, I get 1/100th of the effect, while under the same conditions others can obtain at the very best 1/10,000th of the effect. This feature alone bars all competition. In regard to other advantages, there are only two ways possible of economically utilizing the energy transmitted, either storing it in dynamic form, as for instance the energy of well-timed thrusts is stored in a pendulum, or by accumulating it in potential form, as for example compressed air is stored in a reservoir. My rights through patents on both are fundamental. Referring particularly to telegraphy and telephone, I have still in the Patent Office 2 applications pending. In one I describe and claim discoveries relating to the transmission of signals through the earth to any distance, no matter how great, and in the other a new principle which secures absolute privacy of messages, and also enables the simultaneous transmission of any desired number of messages up to many thousands through the same channel, be it the earth or a wire or a cable. On this latter principle I have applied for patents in the chief foreign countries. I consider these inventions of extreme commercial importance. Hoping that I shall be able to satisfy you that your generosity and confidence in me have not been misplaced, I remain yours very respectfully, N. Tesla. Morgan's continuing mistreatment of the inventor and lack of acknowledgment of the significance of the plans revealed were almost too much to bear. Tesla could not face the Johnsons or anybody for Thanksgiving, and so declined their invitation. Dear Luca, Tesla wrote, kindly excuse and remember me with kind regards. Signing the letter, Nikola, far away. Newfoundland. Signor Marconi had been commuting regularly between England and the States throughout this period, looking for sites to place his wireless stations. Prime locations included the eastern tip of Long Island, Martha's Vineyard, and Cape Cod. In September 1901, the new equipment, including the immensely powerful transmitter, was installed at Poldhu, England, and a great 200-foot diameter ring of masts 200 feet high had risen like a huge skeleton on the edge of the cliff. Test transmissions to other Marconi stations, in particular that at Crookhaven Island, over 200 miles away, had shown that the waves did, at least to this extent, follow the curvature of the Earth and not fly off into space. Across the Atlantic at Cape Cod, the twin station was similarly nearing completion, and plans were made with quiet optimism for the experiment to take place in a few weeks' time. In September, gale-force winds levelled the aerial in Poldhu, and in November the same thing occurred on the Cape. Tenaciously, Marconi pressed on, gambling with a less powerful but sturdier transmitter in England, and abandoning the idea of constructing a twin in the States. Instead, the Italian would try simply to intercept the signals of the English transmitter by fashioning an aerial with kites, high-altitude weather balloons, and a sensitive coherer as a receiver. On December the 6th, he landed with a small crew in Newfoundland, Canada, and floated up his receiving antenna on a spot designated appropriately as Signal Hill. December the 12th was chosen as the day for the experiment. The beacon selected, ... the Morse code for the letter S. On Friday the 13th, during a lull in a miserable storm of hail and rain, 3 faint taps were heard on his equipment. The world was rocked. Guglielmo Marconi's name was irrefutably carved into the history books. The age of mass communication had begun. 32. The Passing of the Torch, 1902. December 1901. Signor Marconi has scored a shrewd coup. Whether or not the 3 dots he heard came from England, or like those Tesla heard from Mars, if I am aught of profit, we will hear no more of transatlantic messages for some time. Lee de Forest. Embittered, Tesla knew that Marconi's achievement was predicated on the use of his coil, oscillators, and general design, which he had spelled out in lectures years earlier. Preece assumed partial culpability, as he had requested from Tesla the use of this equipment for the work, but Marconi had announced that the Tesla apparatus was unnecessary and ineffectual, and this had caused a rift in the Italian's relationship with Preece. Fleming, on the other hand, having studied Tesla's work in earnest ever since he had received the inventor at his home in London in 1892, saw no such conflict, for it was he who arranged for Marconi the transmitting plant at Poldhu. Tesla revealed many years later, Marconi had declared that wireless communication across the Atlantic was impossible because there was a wall of water several miles high between the 2 continents which the rays could not traverse. But subsequent developments showed that he had used my system in secret all the time, received the plaudits of the world, and accepted stolidly even my own congratulations, and it was only a long time after that he admitted it. Thomas Comerford Martin arrived at his office on Monday, December the 16th, to review the astonishing report from Newfoundland. With only Marconi and 1 aide as a witness, and the plans having been kept secret until the deed was accomplished, many doubted the Italian's proclamation. Professor Sylvanus Thompson of Great Britain suggested that Marconi had probably received static caused by severe weather conditions. One of Martin's colleagues concurred, "It's a fake. Such a thing cannot be done." "I think I should seek another opinion," the editor said as he put in a call to Tom Edison. "Very doubtful. How's it going to get around that blasted curve?" came Edison's hedging response. Martin dialed up Mikhail Pupin. "Professor, do you believe Marconi's transmission is genuine?" "I most certainly do." "Then I think we ought to celebrate it." It was the dead of winter when Tesla ducked out of the Waldorf Astoria as the new crowning electrical savant checked in. Tesla probably went to Wardenclyffe to stare at the first tier of the tower, which was finally under construction. With the temperature so cold, it was just one more annoyance to slow down progress. With only a few days to prepare, Martin was able to book the Astor Gallery at the Waldorf for the banquet on Monday, January the 13th, 1902. With 300 guests arriving, the task of arranging all the particulars put him in a frenzied state. He brushed by fantastic pictures of a wizard's laboratory as he hurried out the door. The hall was decorated with a large map of the Atlantic placed on the wall and a festoon of wires with clusters of 3 lights blinking ... strung between large tablets reading Signal Hill in Newfoundland and Poldhu in England. Around the room, each table had its own model transmission tower, nameplates, and Italian olive-green menus on cardstock with pen and ink drawings of the transatlantic accomplishment. At the upper dais, in the middle, was a medallion with Mr. Marconi's portrait, draped with the Italian flag. American and British flags and pendants for the AIEE and the Italian coat of arms were also placed there. At fitting times, the lights were flashed, to the applause of the audience, and to cap off the dinner, for dessert, a procession of waiters came marching in with ice cream embedded in ice carvings of incandescent lamps, ships at sea, electric vehicles, and wireless telegraph towers. The 4-foot gnome trimmed his goatee and checked his gold pocket watch before smiling at himself once more in the mirror as he departed for the affair. Although he rocked from side to side when he walked, Charles Proteus Steinmetz developed a new swagger, for he had just been elected to the presidency of the AIEE. He was about to receive an honorary doctorate from Harvard and a professorship in engineering from Union College, located near GE headquarters in Schenectady, New York. The college appointment enabled Steinmetz to divide his time between academia and the corporate world. During the 6-hour train ride down to the city, the abstract mathematician carefully read through galleys of his opus on AC, which was about to be republished in a larger format by McCraw-Hill. It was a small matter to the preeminent scholar that he had removed the name of his co-author and had continued the practice of eliminating reference to the source of his work, the inventions, researches, and writings of Nikola Tesla. Electricians, he rationalized, would be more interested in his advanced concepts than in knowing who first investigated the phenomena. By 1907, Steinmetz would lead in establishing the AIEE Code of Ethics. Who was Tesla anyway? Marconi was the man of the hour. At the upper dais sat a gaggle of Tesla adversaries. Aside from the new president, there was Professor Pupin, now financially tied to Marconi. Elihu Thomson, who claimed priority on the invention of the AC motor and Tesla coil. Carl Herring, who had backed Dobrovolsky in priority discussions of the inventor of long-distance AC transmission. William Stanley, who had pirated the Tesla Westinghouse induction motor and was now producing them legally for GE. Frank Sprague, who gained his reputation in part as the inventor of the electric railroad, when in fact it was all part of Tesla's AC polyphase system. T.C. Martin, who was still angry about past monies owed for sale of the inventor's collected works, and, of course, Guglielmo Marconi, the chap who had beaten him to the punch. Tesla's decision not to attend created an excellent atmosphere for gaiety, and for perpetuating Steinmetz's published position of relegating the pioneer to the category of non-person. Others present at the infamous upper dais included Alexander Graham Bell and general counsels from Great Britain and Italy, and around the hall were Josh Wetzler, D. McFarlane Moore, many of the men's wives, and Mrs. Thomas Alva Edison, who was representing her husband. Martin presided over the occasion, opening up the period for lectures with readings of telegrams from those not in attendance. He began with a letter from the mayor, and then read a communique from the Wizard of Menlo Park. To T.C. Martin, I'm sorry that I'm prevented from attending your annual dinner tonight, especially as I would like to pay my respects to Marconi, the young man who had the monumental audacity to attempt and succeed in jumping an electric wave clear across the Atlantic. Thomas A. Edison. Martin did not announce that at Christmas Marconi had sent Edison a cheerful telegram reiterating his success and offering to display personally to the master his transatlantic equipment, or that Marconi was already tendering Edison offers for his early wireless patents. The New York Times reported cheers when the toastmaster came to a letter from Nikola Tesla, who said that he could not rise to the occasion. No doubt they masked the jeers. Grinning through his oversized moustache, Martin waited for the clamour to subside before continuing with the rest of the letter. I regret not being able to contribute to the pleasure of the evening, but I wish to join the members in heartily congratulating Mr. Marconi on his brilliant results. He is a splendid worker, full of rare and subtle energies. May he prove to be one of those whose powers increase and whose mind feelers reach out farther with advancing years for the good of the world and honour of his country. Professor Elihu Thomson followed. I had received the news of Marconi's great feat from over the telephone from a reporter who wished to know whether I believed that signals had actually been received across the Atlantic. Riding on the accolades of the audience, Thomson related his response. As I told the reporter, if Marconi says that he received the signals, I believe they were received. And then the hero took the pulpit. Waiting graciously for the applause to subside, he began. Signor Marconi explained his syntonic wireless system, and pointed out that he had built very largely on the work of others, and mentioned Clerk Maxwell, Lord Kelvin, Professor Henry, and Professor Hertz. At this time, its most important use was for communication between ships. The Italian was pleased to announce that over 70 ships now carried his wireless system, 37 for the British Navy, 12 for the Italian Navy, and the remainder on large liners such as the Cunard Line, the North German Lloyd, and the Beaver Line. There were also over 20 stations in operation, with more on construction. Marconi addressed the problem of selective tuning, and suggested he had such a system created so that messages transmitted from one ship can in no way be received by any other, except that attuned to receive the message. Stated as bravado, Marconi was bluffing, as he had no system for creating separate channels. It is my hope, Signor Marconi concluded, that at no great distant date I shall bring my system to the point of perfection of allowing friends and relatives to communicate with each other across the ocean at a small expense. Professor Pupin concluded, referring to claims made that previous to Marconi, wireless signals have been transmitted over short distances, Pupin said, glancing back to the upper dais, any schoolboy by means of a Hertzian oscillator could transmit such signals over a short distance, but it required the engineer to make such work of avail to the world. In attempting to allay fears that Marconi's system would make obsolete Atlantic cables, Dr. Pupin shrewdly pointed out as an illustration how the completion of electric lighting had aided the gas industry and enhanced rather than decreased the value of their investments. On January the 9th, Tesla dispatched a letter to Morgan explaining that the patents of the Marconi-Fleming syndicate do not accurately reflect their actual apparatus, but are covered by my patents of 1896 and 1897. The balance of the letter describes the precursor to what becomes, a half-century later, the major television networks. I need not tell you that I have worked as hard as I have dared without collapsing. Having examined and rejected hundreds of experiments with the capital at command, I am glad to say that by slow and steady advances, I have managed to continue a machine which shall produce an electrical disturbance of sufficient intensity to be perceptible over the whole of the earth. When I throw the switch, I shall send a greeting to the whole world, and for this great triumph I shall ever be grateful to you. This system will do away not only with the cables, but with the newspapers also. For how can journals at the present stay in business when every customer can have a cheap machine printing its own world news? The beautiful invention which I am now developing will enable me to spread our name into every home, and it will be able everywhere to hear the tune of my voice. This would be the inventor's last communique to the financier for fully 9 months. He set himself the difficult task of completing construction of the 18-story transmission tower, knowing full well that he did not have sufficient funds. From bank records dating back to 1896, it is apparent that Tesla had nearly $50,000, some of which had been converted into land assets. The last of Morgan's money had probably been received, so it was at this time, in the midst of 1902, that the trailblazer began to tap his personal reserves to keep the project going. Work would continue at a steady pace throughout the year. Other competitors. Having received his doctorate in electrical engineering in 1899, Lee de Forest had tried once again to gain entree into his idol's laboratory, but for a third time Tesla refused him. De Forest decided, therefore, to set out on his own. In 1901, he succeeded in sending wireless messages across the Hudson River over a distance of 1 or 2 miles, and shortly thereafter sent impulses from State Street in downtown New York to Staten Island, 7 miles away. By using self-restoring detectors with telephone receivers instead of Morse inkers or sounders, de Forest succeeded in increasing substantially the speed of transmission. Now his apparatus threatened Western Union's local telegraph lines. Working with D. McFarlane Moore, who had studied Tesla's monumental early volume, de Forest was able to decrease the problems of static interference. By 1903, he was reporting yacht races at a speed of 25 to 30 words per minute, or about as fast as a Morse code operator could send them. By 1904, he could transmit messages 180 miles over land between Buffalo and Cleveland, and by 1908, his signaling device was jumping continents. Perhaps it was because of Tesla's regard for the Yale graduate, or because of the canniness of his patents, that Tesla did not try to prevent de Forest from using his oscillators and general scheme. The same, however, could not be said for Reginald Fessenden, whom he sued for patent infringement in April 1902. Fessenden, who had worked for both Edison and Westinghouse as far back as the early 1980s, is generally credited with having invented the means of sending voice over the airwaves. Although Marconi was using the electromagnetic frequencies to mimic the impulse patterns of the Morse code, it occurred to Fessenden to send out a continuous signal with the amplitude of the waves varied or modulated to make the variation follow the irregularities of sound waves. At the receiving station, these variations could be sorted out and reconverted into sound. In 1906, the first such message was sent out from the Massachusetts coast, and wireless receivers could actually pick up the music. In this way, radio, as we know it, was born. A year later, using his patented auction, which was in essence a modification of Tesla's brush tube, De Forest succeeded in transmitting the voice of Enrico Caruso, who was singing at the Metropolitan Opera House in New York. Interested, for reasons of priority, in obtaining Edison's grasshopper wireless patent, dating from the 1880s, Fessenden sought a job with GE in 1902 to inaugurate construction of a wireless transmitting station at Brant Rock, Massachusetts. Although he stayed friendly with Edison and looked after his wayward son Tom Jr., who'd been caught passing bad checks, Fessenden was unsuccessful in obtaining Edison's key wireless patent. The Menlo Park wizard had sold it to Marconi for $60,000. Legal entanglements were expensive, but Tesla felt that he had no choice but to protect as many fundamental aspects of his system as he was able to. How else could he prove to Morgan that his work in the field really was the basis of the systems that were succeeding? In June 1900, Reginald Fessenden had applied for a patent on tuned circuits. The following month, Tesla filed for one as well. It was a matter of public record that Fessenden's application preceded Tesla's. What was at issue was whether or not Fessenden had compiled his invention from Tesla's earlier experiments. Although Fessenden claimed that he had conceived the idea in 1898, Tesla pointed out that Fessenden was, 1, unable to provide documentation of this earlier date, 2, he did not create a working model of his apparatus, and 3, the machine had not been used commercially. Whereas Fessenden's application was rudimentary, Tesla's delineated clearly a multiplicity of goals. For example, 1, operating distant apparatus, 2, controlling signals by using 2 or more idiosyncratic electrical frequencies, 3, producing a plurality of distinctive impulses onto a receiving apparatus comprising a manifold number of circuits, and 4, creating a combination transmitter-receiver arrangement set up to respond to a succession of impulses released in a given order. Whereas Fessenden could date his theoretical conceptualizations to perhaps 1898, Tesla dated the onset of his work to 1889 and provided his numerous publications as evidence. With specific reference to the operation of tuned circuits, the inventor displayed his fully working teleautomaton, which he introduced to the world in 1898. Without Tesla's AC oscillators, Fessenden's machinery could not operate. Unless he had lived in a hermitage, it would have been impossible for Fessenden to have conceived his invention without utilizing Tesla's attainments. Parker W. Page questioned his client for hours. Tesla's testimony would run 72 typewritten pages. Throughout mid-April, the testimony continued, and after Tesla was finished, his 29-year-old manager, George Scherf, took the stand. Scherf, who was living at Wardenclyffe by this time, was able to substantiate that Tesla's tuned circuits and long-distance wireless experiments were first conducted in his presence in 1895, when he began working for Tesla at his laboratory at 33 to 35 South Fifth Avenue, before it burned to the ground. Scherf remembered the inventor transmitting wireless impulses from the Houston Street lab to the roof of the Hotel Gerlach, which was 1 or 2 miles away. Fritz Lowenstein, just a year younger than Scherf, followed. Having returned from Europe in February and newly married, Lowenstein had gained re-employment with Tesla at Wardenclyffe. In a heavy German accent, Lowenstein thoroughly described the nature of the confidential experiments at Colorado Springs. "Mr. Tesla explained to me," Lowenstein stated, "that the chief feature of a practical wireless telegraph system was the secrecy, immunity, and selectivity. At the same time, he explained to me how 2 oscillations are secured from 1 oscillating apparatus. When I came to Mr. Tesla," the college-educated engineer revealed, "I didn't understand anything at all about it, but he soon showed me the great value of tuned circuits, and then I understood what tuning was." Dear Mr. Scherf, Mr. Page has just told me that my opponent's attorney has admitted my priority. Mr. Fessenden must be disappointed, of course, and I'm sorry for him, although, you know, he has written some articles which are not very nice. My honor as the originator of the principle is assured." Tesla may have won the case, but he was not about to celebrate. Foremost among his priorities